Pleasant evening and welcome to this RGPF press briefing. I am your host, Woman Corporal Kadina Douglas McLean. Joining me this evening is Deputy Commissioner of Police, Mr. Michael Francois, Assistant Commissioner of Police with responsibility for administration and human resource, Mr. Jessamine Prince, and Assistant Staff Officer, Woman Sergeant Va Hercules Lambert. This evening, Deputy Commissioner will provide a brief update and later entertain questions from members of the media. ACP Prince will speak to operational issues and also more specific to requests for authorization passes during curfew hours. And Woman Sergeant Lambert will brief on the latest emergency powers regulations. I must apologize on behalf of the Commissioner of Police, Mr. Edwin Martin, who was carded to be present here this evening. However, due to another pressing, urgent engagement, he was unable to make it, and he also sent his apologies. So without any further ado, I now invite Deputy Commissioner of Police, Mr. Michael Francois.
Thank you, Corporal Douglas, and a pleasant good evening to all Grenadians, home and abroad, and members of the media who have joined this live press brief hosted by the Royal Grenada Police Force. As we are all aware, the Prime Minister addressed the nation last evening and outlined several measures as articulated in the Emergency Powers COVID-19 Regulations number 3, SRNO number 36 of 2021. As customary after the announcement of every new emergency powers regulation, the RGPF holds a press brief to reiterate the new regulations and to clarify any issues or any clarifications which may arise as we seek to enforce the new regulations. There are several changes in these new regulations which will affect all citizens for the next 2 weeks. And so I'm happy to be here accompanied by Assistant Commissioner of Police, Mr. Jessamine Prince, and Woman Sergeant Hercules to bring some clarity to some issues and take questions or queries which may arise. We are, as a police force, continue to do what is expected of us during these trying times. Our numbers are not as they are expected to be at this time. We have had several persons affected with the COVID-19 virus, and so we have taken measures to ensure that we continue to serve you, the members of the public, in these times as we grapple with the same issues as our citizens throughout the state with the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm happy to hand over at this time to ACP Jessamine Prince, and also to Ms. Lambert, who is going to take you through the regulations and some operational issues. And I'll be happy to take any questions as the need arise. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Francois. ACP Prince would now brief on some operational issues.
Thank you very much, Deputy Commissioner and Madam Chairperson. Pleasant good night to one and all. It is indeed a great privilege for us to come again to you through the media, various media houses, to appraise you of what is happening and basically to guide you to the point where you will be able to conduct yourselves in a manner that is best suited for the current situation that we are in. I always like to preface my comments to recognize the work that God has done for us. We take pride on the portion of scripture that says, except the Lord keep the city, the watchman watcheth but in vain. And as an organization that believes that we can be helped by the hand of God, we take pride in doing our duty with the understanding that God is helping us through all of this process. And having said that, I must recall when we started this operational activities in March 2020, and the RGPF as the only entity with the responsibility for law enforcement in Grenada and defense of country, we must recognize the officers who have been toiling day and night when curfew were imposed, whether it was the whole day or part of the day and night, and officers kept the faith. They held on to their responsibility and delivered services up to this point. And I must say that the RGPF remains strong and resolute to deliver on the mandate that is given to it. I want to commend all of the officers of the Royal Grenada Police Force, including the support staff, the wardens, and all other persons who assisted us in ensuring that we were able to deliver during the trying times. We are not yet through the woods. We are not yet through this situation. We are still battling the situation, and we believe this is the toughest of the times, and it could get tougher. But we are doing this with the understanding that if everyone plays their part, we believe that we can get this thing under control and to bring us back to some degree of normalcy. So the RGPF has continuously reached out to the public to ask you to comply with us. So what you're going to be seeing us doing in the coming days, as of tonight, is our patrols will be out in every community, on the streets, and checking on businesses, checking on people for wearing the mask and for adhering to the protocols and complying with the curfew regulations. So officers will be out there already today, and throughout the night you would see the patrols. We are asking you again as a concerned citizen, as concerned citizens, to adhere to the protocols and comply with the police officers on the patrols. You're also going to see various roadblocks throughout the state, and again, accessing passage through these roadblocks require you, every person, to have an access pass, which would be issued by the Royal Grenada Police Force. In the regulation, there are listed a number of essential workers. And if you are belonging to any entity, any company or institution, and that institution has an ID system, we are expecting and anticipating that you will have that ID system with you when you are accessing the checkpoints. If you are without an ID, accessing these checkpoints could become very difficult, because the only way that we can identify you as being an essential worker is through some form of identification. So again, I'm asking that when you get to the checkpoint and you are required to show, or the officer asks you for your ID, you need to present your ID and allow the officer to examine your ID, take the necessary information, and tell you, yes, sir, or no, sir, I'm sorry, you cannot go through because you are not an essential worker. So again, we are asking you to comply with the officers who are going to be doing this. We also have businesses that are going to be operating, and that will be given a permit to operate. In some instances, those permits will stipulate the conditions under which you will be required to operate. And again, we are asking that you comply with those conditions, because officers will be coming around to check to ensure that you are complying with those regulations. And in particular, the protocol as it relates to sanitization and the wearing of masks for businesses that are operating, those are going to become the watchword for the day. You must wear your mask before you enter into a building where you are seeking to do business, and also be sanitized. We are also asking those businesses to ensure that they have some form of registration that would allow for persons who are accessing your business or your services to be traced should some incident happen at your business that will require us to trace those persons thereafter. So a lot will be happening. Some of which you are accustomed to. All that we are asking is that you comply. Failure to comply would result in officers taking the necessary action to reduce any potential for the spread of the virus. I would stop here and maybe later on come back with how we process the whole pass system after Ms. Lambert will go through the legal requirements during this period of time. So I would hand over or yield to her and come back on the pass system later on.
Thank you very much, ACP Prince. At this time, Woman Sergeant Lambert will brief us on the COVID-19 regulations. Sergeant Lambert.
Thank you, Corporal Douglas. A pleasant good evening to the listening public. And as Corporal Douglas indicated, my role is to apprise the public of the Emergency Powers COVID-19 number 3 regulations, which repeal the Emergency Powers COVID-19 number 2 regulations. These regulations came into effect on the 4th of September 2021 and expire at 11:59 p.m. on the 21st day of September 2021. These regulations have been with us from the onset of the pandemic, and they continue to evolve as the COVID-19 threat and situation evolves. To date, we've had approximately 35 amendments to these regulations. And as far as law is concerned, this is quite a number of amendments in a short space of time. The regulations seek to minimize citizens' exposure to and control the spread of the highly contagious COVID-19 virus. And although ignorance of the law is no excuse, as law enforcement, it is important to us that our constituents understand and follow these regulations. And I will seek to explain the provisions of the regulation. The regulation restricts movement of persons daily from the period 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. the following day. Freedom of movement may be exercised from 5 a.m. to 6:59 p.m. each day in accordance to the regulations. And further down, I'll explain how movement is to be exercised based on the regulation. However, it is important to note that movement is restricted for the entire period from 5 p.m. on Friday, the 10th day of September, 5 p.m. on Friday, the 10th day of September 2021, to 5 a.m. on Monday, 13 September 2021, except for these purposes: for the purpose of being vaccinated or being tested for COVID-19. So for the period 10th to 13th of September, movement is only allowed for the purpose of being vaccinated or to be tested for COVID-19, or as provided in the regulations, and I will state the other reasons in the regulation, or as may be authorized by the Commissioner of Police in consultation with the Chief Medical Officer. So these are the three reasons under which movement is authorized for the period 10th to 13th September. And we know that there are exemptions to the law. Workers who are providing an essential service, doctors, lawyers, and police officers, it is stated in the regulations, who are deemed to be essential workers. Medical emergency. So if you have a medical emergency, you are authorized to move. In the case of a person who is traveling out of state on the date of travel, so if it happens that your date of travel is on the 11th September, which is a period of curfew for the weekend, you are allowed to move on your date of travel for the purpose of travel. So you, of course, if the officers stop you, you may have to present your passport or maybe a ticket showing that you're leaving the state. The Commissioner of Police, in consultation with the Chief Medical Officer, may authorize persons and businesses to operate during that period. And of course, you'll have to apply, and it should be considered by both parties. Right, so as I said, we have the daily movement from the 4th right up to the 10th, and then from the 10th from 5 p.m. for the whole weekend. Then we come back from the Monday. Daily restriction of movement will resume thereafter for the period 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. the following day. And then for the following weekend, movement will again be restricted for the entire period from 5 p.m. on Friday the 17th day of September 2021 to 5 a.m. on Monday the 20th day of September 2021. And as again, you can move during that period for vaccination, to be tested for COVID-19, as may be authorized by the Commissioner of Police and for the other reasons provided in the regulations. During these periods, the movement of persons is restricted, and every person shall remain confined to their place of residence, inclusive of their yard space, to avoid contact with persons outside of his or her household. So that is the intent of the law, so that persons will avoid contact with persons outside of his or her household. And that means your neighbors are excluded, a close family friend is excluded. The law is trying to get persons to remain in their grouping so as to prevent the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Shelter in place, Regulation 5. So notwithstanding that there are curfews daily and then on weekends for the extended period, the law is saying that if you do not have any reasons to move, and it will give the reasons why persons should move, persons must stay at home. So even if the curfew period is not in place, if you do not have a specific reason to move, you should be at home. All right? It says in an effort to prevent the spread of COVID-19, every person shall remain confined to their place of residence, inclusive of their yard space, to avoid contact outside of their family, except essential workers reporting to work, workers reporting to work in establishments or business that are permitted to be open, for essential travel to an establishment or office permitted to be open. So businesses that are permitted to be open, workers can go to work for the period that the curfew is not in effect. Essential workers can go to work, and persons who are going to do business in these establishments that are allowed to be open are allowed to move. For outdoor exercise, whether alone or together with family members living under the same roof, not exceeding an hour and a half per day, between the hours of 5 a.m. and 6 p.m. So these are the reasons persons are permitted to move in the period that a curfew is not in effect. So when the curfew is in effect, you are restricted, and when you are permitted to move, you are only permitted to move for particular reasons. And these are the reasons I just said. Essential workers going to work, businesses that are allowed to be open, persons who are going to do business at these places, and for the purpose of exercise. No person shall drive a vehicle on any public or private road except for the purpose previously stated and for the purpose of travel out of state of a date of travel. So vehicles should only be on the road to go to a place of work or to a place of business, or if you're traveling out of state. And the law says in Regulation 16, the Royal Grenada Police Force shall have the powers to stop any vehicle and inquire as to the purposes for which that vehicle is being utilized, and to arrest anyone found in violation of this restriction. And vehicle here includes a motor vehicle or a motorbike, and that is outside of public service vehicles. So the businesses that are allowed to be operated under the regulation. And as you said, people can move to go to their place of work if your business is allowed to be open. And these are the businesses that are allowed to be open. And the main operating hours for businesses, as indicated by the law, is from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. operating hours. Airports are allowed to be open, commercial courier flights, commercial ports, and related businesses. Accountants engage in their trade by appointment only. Banks, credit unions, and money services businesses and companies offering payday loans. Food vendors and restaurants offering drive-through or takeaway services only. Flower shops with only pickup and delivery services. Registered or bona fide fishermen, farmers, butchers engage in their business. So you're moving for the purpose of being engaged in your business. Offices of the government, statutory bodies, state-owned enterprise, gas stations, hospital and medical facilities and medical supply establishment, pharmacies with pickup and delivery services only, registered medical practitioners, dental practitioners, opticians by appointment only, veterinarians engage in their trade, hardware store with pickup and delivery services only, hotels, the restaurant of which may offer only takeaway or room service, insurance companies by appointment only, law offices and attorney at law engage in their trade by appointments, laundromats, landscapers and gardeners engage in their businesses, manufacturers and suppliers, wholesale or retail grocery stores and commercial bakeries, businesses licensed to provide security guard services, the St. George's University, workers of construction for urgent plumbing, electrical, roof repairs or other emergency repairs for a home or business, and other works of construction as authorized by the Permanent Secretary with responsibility for works in accordance with all the conditions and such authorization. So if you're doing construction outside of emergency, you must apply to the Permanent Secretary with responsibility for works for permission to continue such construction. Other businesses are undertakings as may be specifically exempted in writing by the Commissioner of Police. So the Commissioner of Police can authorize other business not so listed in law to operate. Supreme Courts and Magistrates Courts shall remain accessible, including the conduct of virtual hearings. Conditions for opening. The owner or operator of establishment permitted to be open shall comply with all physical distancing, sanitization, and mask wearing protocols. Conditions imposed by the Commissioner of Police on the direction of Cabinet and shall be subject to regulations 4.2, which speaks on the period of curfew. So from the 7 p.m. to the 5 a.m. and then for the weekend period curfews, all businesses must adhere to these regulations. Please, it is important to note that if the manager, owner, other person in charge or employee of any establishment, business or office aids, abets, or facilitates the contravention of these regulations, the establishment shall be immediately closed without prejudice to any other penalty in law. Please note also, there shall be no consumption of alcohol in or in the vicinity of any shop, grocery store or establishment, or in any public place. Consumption of alcohol is strictly prohibited. So for the businesses that we listed earlier, that I listed previously, that are permitted to be open, other businesses, establishment or office may continue business operations by allowing its employees to work remotely from home, utilizing virtual means, unless their employees are permitted to work, as I previously stated. So all other workers are to work remotely from home. that are not stipulated in law are exempted by the Commissioner of Police. Where a business is unable to continue its operation by working remotely or virtually from home, the business shall suspend or cease its operations. Education instructions, Regulation 11. Education institutions may only operate as authorized by the minister with responsibility for education, which may include utilizing virtual means. All daycare centers shall be closed. Religious instructions, Regulation 12. All places of religious instruction, shall be closed. Activities by electronic or virtual means are allowed. There shall be no wakes or happy hour activities at funerals. Restriction on social activities and funerals. No person shall host or attend any social activity of any description, including weddings. Funerals are to be held between the hours of 9 a.m. and 12 noon for a maximum period of 1 hour, and no more than 20 persons are to be in attendance in addition to the officiant and essential mortuary staff. There shall be no wakes or happy hour activities. Restriction on beaches and rivers, Regulation 14. Persons can utilize beaches and rivers between the hours of 5 a.m. and 10 a.m. daily, except for the September 10th to 13th period and the September 17th to 20th curfew period, for the purpose of swimming and exercise only. Every person must maintain a physical distance of no less than 6 feet from any person outside of his or her household. There shall be no picnics, party, or other gatherings at a beach or river. Restriction on domestic travel, Regulation 15. No person shall offer or hire or seek to travel on any vessel, whether by air or sea, and that is to Carriacou, from Grenada to Carriacou or from Carriacou to Grenada, except transport or freight in the case of a person who is traveling out of state or for travel essential for trade with the approval of the Ports Authority, as the case may be. No person shall enter or travel between Grenada and Carriacou unless a rapid COVID-19 test is conducted and the result is negative. The regulation does not apply to travel between Carriacou and Petit-Martinique. It only restricts the movement from Grenada to Carriacou and vice versa. Public transportation, Regulation 17, referring to motor omnibus, hiring cars or taxi. Every public transportation and every person traveling on public transportation shall practice good hand hygiene and proper sanitary behavior and wear a mask, face shield, or covering. No person shall eat or drink while traveling in any motor omnibus, hiring car, or taxi. And we'll understand the reason for that. We'll have to take off our masks and, of course, expose others and ourselves to the risk of the virus, exposure to the virus. Operators of motor omnibus, hiring cars, and taxi may only operate as authorized by the Commissioner of Police, acting on the direction of Cabinet. So this section allows the Commissioner and the Cabinet to regulate the movement of vehicles, of public service transportation. Restriction on visitation. No person shall visit or be permitted to visit any place of quarantine or isolation, a patient in the hospital or residential care establishment or facility, including an elderly nursing home, hospital, or a detainee in prison. Mandatory reporting and isolation. Any person who is exhibiting any flu-like symptom shall immediately notify a police station in his or her parish, or anyone who is suspected to be so affected by the virus shall be reported. And any person who is directed by the Ministry of Health to submit him or herself to self-isolation or quarantine shall comply with the direction. Duties and powers of the police force, Regulation 21. It shall be the duty of every police officer to enforce, using reasonable force if necessary, compliance with these regulations and with any order, instruction, or condition lawfully made, given, or imposed by any officer or other person under the authority of these regulations. And for such purposes, any police officer may enter any premises without a warrant. Any police officer may arrest without warrant any person whom he or she has reasonable cause to believe has committed an offense against these regulations. So any of the regulations that I spoke of before, that a police officer suspects that has been breached, are arrestable offenses. And the penalty is a fine not exceeding $1,000 and to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 12 months. Alternatively to arrest, a police officer may issue a ticket, and if it is so paid by the individual, the fixed penalty will be $550. So there are alternatives to arrest, which is the ticketing system. And notwithstanding that all the other laws gave us the same powers of arrest, we have resorted to using the fixed penalty ticket system. But that authority in law has been there, and it is still here. The regular requirement to wear masks in public, in motor vehicle, with persons outside of your household. So once you're giving someone a ride who does not belong to your household, does not live with you, you must be wearing a mask. If you're alone with your family members who live with you, you can travel without a mask in your vehicle. A child above 7 years accompanied by an adult, the adult is responsible for ensuring that the child wears a mask. And owners and operators of business shall not allow persons who are not wearing a mask to enter the premises. Employees who are working in the businesses must also be wearing a mask. As once you are in a place where the public has access to, employees must also wear a mask in their place of employment. If you're in your own office space with no one else present, you are exempted from wearing the mask. Staff at the place of employment and customers must maintain the 6 feet physical distancing inside and outside of their place of establishment. And the businesses must also ensure there are markers indicating the 6 feet for persons who are waiting in line at a checkpoint or persons who are waiting outside of the establishment to enter to do businesses. And of course, the sanitization of hands, and of course, as Assistant Commissioner of Police, Mr. Prince said, the book to facilitate contact tracing. So this is a synopsis of the regulations. I hope that I will have explained sufficiently. And as we can see, these regulations that require the Royal Grenada Police Force to monitor our beaches, our businesses, our buses, vessels, individuals, villages, and communities for compliance. And it is all in an effort to protect our people. It is a humongous task. However, even with our members and their families being affected, we remain undaunted in our efforts. The sad reality is that while we seek to protect others and to protect ourselves, there will always be those among us who are irresponsible. So we need all persons who understand the current and the potential threat of this virus and pandemic to join with us, to be our ears and eyes on the ground, and most importantly, to lend your voice in support of encouraging compliance. With rapid community spread and increased mortality, it is important that every person comply with these regulations. I thank you.
Thank you so very much, Woman Sergeant Lambert. Just before we proceed to entertaining questions from members of the media, I will ask ACP Prince to return to briefly explain the processes involved in applying for permission or passes, authorization to move during the restricted hours. ACP Prince?
Thank you again, Madam Chair. And just to elaborate a little bit more on the pass system, Ms. Sergeant Lambert spoke about the domestic travel and the requirement for, or the restriction on the movement to the island, Carriacou, Grenada, Carriacou movement, Grenada, Carriacou, Pitimatnik movement. Now, the regulation makes specific mention for any approval of travel to the islands to be approved by the Port Authority. Yes? So if an individual who may fit under the exemption of travel is desirous of moving to Carriacou or Carriacou to Grenada, that person must apply to the Port Authority for permission to move. And of course, Ports Authority will inquire of your justification for movement and so approve your movement or not approve your movement. However, because you are going to be required to move to the island, the law requires that you also be tested with the rapid test. And if the test is negative, then you would move, then you would be allowed to move. Now, for you to be tested, obviously the Ministry of Health will come in. So the Ports Authority does not provide the services for being tested. The Ministry of Health has to. So you have to first and foremost secure your negative PCR with the Ministry of Health, and then you apply to the Ports Authority for movement to Carriacou or Carriacou to Grenada. All right? So I just wanted to make sure that that is clear. You do not have to apply to the Commissioner of Police for permission to travel to the island, because that is controlled by the Ministry of Health and Ports Authority. All other movements in country, an application has to be made for a pass or an access pass to move throughout the country. Now, I want to state here that the persons who are considered essential workers, and I said it earlier, that if you are an essential worker, the expectation is that you would have some form of ID or identification issued by your ministry, department, establishment, or business place, wherever you are a worker. And that ID card will suffice. It will be accepted at the checkpoint in you presenting it to show that you are an essential worker. Now, that document or that pass that is issued by your company is not a pass or not an ID that is going to give you the opportunity to go and bust a line. And I want to be frank. You're not going to be using your ID to bust a line. And the reason for that is because every time you cross a checkpoint, that ID and yourself, vehicle number and all of that will be recorded. And so if for some reason the checkpoint supervisor realizes that you are not looking as though you are officially from duty or officially going to duty or to perform some essential service, that will be recorded, and a check will be made against your management to know that whether or not on that particular time and so on of the night, whether or not you are on official engagement for your company. So please, we are trying to avoid and to keep this thing under control, and we are asking everybody to use the system that is in place to ensure that no one is exposed unnecessarily to this situation. So those are the persons who are not registered as essential worker, and you perhaps do not have an ID card issued from your place of work. You need to apply to the Commissioner of Police for permission to move. And an application to the Commissioner of Police to move has to be in consultation with the Chief Medical Officer, and in some cases, the Secretary to Cabinet. It depends on which area that you are coming from. Once a decision is made, a response will be given to you, whether it is by a telephone call just to alert you that yes, it has been approved, and therefore you need to check your email address. Every application, we are asking that they be made via email because we want to avoid contact as much as possible. So try and avoid coming in person. For those persons who don't have a choice but to walk into the station or to the headquarters with your handwritten permit, we would accept that because we would understand clearly that you do not have the means to transmit those things via email. So we would accept that. But we try as best. We want to ask as much as possible that people try and use the media platform via email to get those applications to us. Also, so the pass would be, the response on whether your pass is approved or not will be sent to you via email. I want to also say that a pass is not a vehicle pass. I do not want you to see this as a vehicle pass. The pass is issued to individuals. If you pay close attention to the regulation, it speaks about people moving, not vehicles. So you may send an application for a pass and you have only the vehicle number and the driver, but there you have intention to have other persons in the vehicle. No, you must send the names of every person in that vehicle that will be traveling and the reason why these persons have to be traveling at that particular time. The response will be given to you to say yes or no, and if yes, between what time and what time you will be allowed to travel. It will be good and helpful if you can tell us in advance what is the time that you intend to be on the road, what is the time that you expect to get home from work or whatever the case may be, and we will give you a pass to allow you to get to your home without any problems with the checkpoints. But when you get to the checkpoints, you cannot just flash a pass and say, well, I have a pass, and then expect the officer to allow you to just go. The officer would take time to examine the pass because in the pass there are conditions. And if for any reason you are violating the condition of the pass, the officer then can take action against you. So I want you to know that when you get to the checkpoint, the officer asks you for your pass, or what you can do, just present the pass as soon as you get to the checkpoint, or wait for the officer to ask you. Present the pass, the officer would examine it, scrutinize it, see that it meets all the requirements or you meet all the requirements, and then wave you along. Please, let us cooperate with the officers at the checkpoints, and let's make sure that if we are going to move, we have the appropriate pass, the appropriate ID, and we are on the road because we are engaged in some form of business, either coming from or going to some essential services. Any other reason for being on the road will not be accepted or will not be allowed. The emergencies, yes, we are going to accept because you have a case of emergency. You need to, when you get to the checkpoint, yes, while it's a case of emergency, the officer has to be certain that it is in fact a case of emergency. We do not want an opportunity, or we want to create the opportunity where people will just drive up to a checkpoint and say, I have an emergency, when in truth and in fact they are running from a situation that was a criminal act, and they're running from that situation saying that it's an emergency. The officer have to be satisfied at the checkpoint that you have an emergency. It would not take long, but you just stop and you indicate. The officer would examine in a few seconds and wave you along, and perhaps even escort you to the hospital if the case may warrant that. So again, let us all do our part to cooperate and work together because that is the only how we will achieve success in this game. Thank you, and all the best.
Thank you very much, ACP Prince. And members of the public who are desirous of applying for passes, you can send your requests to the following email address: rgpfcovidops@gmail.com. Again, rgpfcovidops@gmail.com, or you can reach us via telephone number 405-7743. We would now move to the question segment, and I firstly would like to invite GBN to pose their question.
Good night to everybody. My first question is as it relates to the restriction of traveling to the Sister Isle. Does that include vessels that travel for trade? That was not mentioned. My second question, what are measures that will be taken by the Coast Guard as it relates to the restrictions for cease traveling between the mainland and Sister Isle? The third question, RGPF would have had recently issued up, is presently investigating a voice note where it was claimed to be forged or whatever it was. What about the authenticity of the passes? What are some of the measures that are going to be taken? And how would the officers know the authenticity of the passes? I hope I'm able to ask the other one. Businesses who would have not complied, could you please tell us what are some of the penalties for businesses who would have not complied to, other than being shut down? What would happen next? That's what I'm really asking. That's the end of my questions.
All right, I'll take the first question, and Mr. Prince and Ms. Lambert would seek the others. The question that you asked with respect to travel, restrictions on domestic travel, I just want to bring you back to section 15 of the regulations, which speak to, in respect of travel between the islands of Grenada and the island of Carriacou, no person shall offer for hire or seek travel on any vessel, whether by air or by sea, except, and the one that you're speaking about, A, is transport of freight, or in the case of person who is traveling out of the jurisdiction, or C, for travel essential for trade. So there's an exemption for persons who is going to travel by vessel for trade under sections 15 of the regulations. So that would answer your first question. So Prince, you'll take a second.
Okay. In respect to the pass, I'm kind of hesitant to tell you what the security features are on the pass, because that is for the officers who are checking the passes to know, and the officers on the checkpoints are aware of what the passes looks like, what the security features on the passes are. The expectation is that any person who is showing up at the checkpoint must be sure that they have an authentic pass, because if it is detected that you do not have an authentic pass, then that could be another fraudulent approach or other criminal act that you are actually committing. So I cannot tell you what the security features are. The officers on the ground, they do know what they are looking for in the pass, and the expectation is that persons who are accessing these checkpoints must be certain that they have an authentic pass in their possession if they're going to use it to go through the checkpoint.
Also, to add on the question of authenticity of passes, I would like to encourage persons to be very careful if you would be attempting to do such in presenting a pass that is not authentic, because you're not only going to be dealt with for the COVID regulations, but the other general criminal laws of Grenada is going to kick in, where you're going to be arrested for those as well. So we are aware, as Mr. Prince rightly indicated, what are the features on our passes. We have specimens of all the passes that are to be issued, and in the event that any pass is uttered to a police officer on the ground and it is recognized to be not authentic, we are going to be dealing with this very seriously with respect to the laws of Grenada, COVID-wise, and the criminal laws of Grenada. Thank you.
Anybody would answer the question regarding the Coast Guard?
The question is in relation to RGPF's Coast Guard response in relation to monitoring the movement between Carriacou and Pittimanik. How do we intend to go about that?
Since the onset of the COVID-19 regulations, we have had our Coast Guard unit monitoring all our coastlines, and we have all additionally beefed up the Coast Guard response at Carriacou and Petit Martinique. So there are vessels up there. We have sent in an additional vessel to Carriacou, which is monitoring our waters between Grenada, Carriacou, and the other islands which surround those islands. So the Coast Guard is up and about, and we are doing what is expected with respect to COVID and other illegal activities in those areas.
Sergeant Lambert, would you? So the final question, it's in relation to businesses who fail to comply with expectations of the regulations, penalties.
Okay, so there are several measures under the regulation for businesses who are not in compliance. Section 20, Regulation 20 says that the Chief Medical Officer may close a business or direct the closure of the business for a period not exceeding 7 business days to facilitate the training of the management and staff in order to ensure that businesses, establishments, or offices comply with the public health protocols. So where a business is in breach of the public health protocols, the Chief Medical Officer can direct closure and training for subsequent reopening. That is one measure. There is also another measure for closure of the business. And of course, the owners can be charged under the regulations for breach of the regulation. And I said the penalty is $1,000, and I stated so previously what the penalties are. So these are the different measures under the Act to deal with infractions of the regulations. Oh, and before we proceed, Corporal Douglas, I want to bring to the notice of the public, and please note carefully, an amendment to Regulation 9 of COVID-19 Regulation number 3, which speaks of the closure businesses that are permitted, and I said that it was construction, and you can, for emergency purposes, and you must apply to the Ministry of Works. But that has been amended. Please take careful note. And all works of construction are permitted. There is no necessity to apply to the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Works or otherwise. Works of constructions, carte blanche, are allowed as amended after the passage of the Act, of the regulations. So please take careful note, and that is an amendment I must bring to the attention of the public.
GBN, do you have any additional questions?
I'll give my other colleagues time to do so.
Very well. Ms. Linda Straker, you may proceed.
Good evening, and thank you. Actually, my first question had to do with the area where she has just cleared up about work of construction, that it is okay. So I wouldn't go again ask like the questions that I had attached to it. My question though is with regard to travel to Carriacou, domestic travel, is there a time span for a person to do that antigen test? Does it have to happen like on the day of travel or a day or two before travel? With regards to a person who would be traveling overseas, leaving home to go to the airport, what the driver of that person, do they also have to seek permission to get access to travel to bring the person onto the airport? My third question is, earlier, well, we're still there in this week, the court issued a statement, a notice, saying that all magistrate courts in Grenada are closed for approximately 2 weeks. We are aware not all citizens do comply with the law. Can any one of the officers tell us what would happen now in the event that someone is detained and officially arrested with court not in session right now because magistrate courts are closed. That's all for now. I
I'll
do
just
have.
read one. Um, I just want to point out that irrespective of the courts being closed, if someone is arrested, the magistrates still avail themselves of carrying out the functions as a magistrate, so we can apply for bail, etc., if the needs arise. And the magistrates have been very cooperative in this regard in granting bail or remanding persons appropriately if the need arise. So the physical closure of the court um, is what we're speaking about, but the magistrates are still available to take action where necessary. And on the second one that you speak about, the restriction to travel, we have not seen a specified time as to when you should take that test. The Act speaks to subjecting yourself to a test that is negative. But the general rule at this time speaks to 72 hours before the time of travel, in overseas travel, etc. So we would clarify whether the Act is referring to providing a negative test on the spot, or they will go with the general rule of 72 hours. It's not recorded here, so we can clarify that for you, Linda, and get back to you appropriately.
In respect to the traveler traveling out of the country, and the case where that person is driven to the airport and back, it would be good for the person who is the driver to be allowed to travel by way of a pass. The law doesn't really tell us here that speaks to the individual being driven. Basically talk about the traveler who is exempted. So the driver who is taking the person to the airport will require to have a pass, and that pass can be presented on his return, because obviously when if he has the traveler with him or her, that person, because they are traveling out of the state, they will be allowed to travel. They will be allowed to be taken to the airport by presenting the ticket and the passport to show that they are traveling out. However, when the person is returning, again, because you may meet different persons on the checkpoint, there has to be some justification or some legitimate reason why you're on the road, and that will be necessary to show or to have a pass at that time. So a pass is required for the driver who is taking the person to the airport.
Thank you, ACP Prince. We now move on to Mikey. Please proceed with your questions.
All right. I'm particularly concerned about a certain sector of our society, so this round I'll speak of them. Now, can farmers, some fishermen, caregivers, and other small business owners and sole traders in the informal industry issue IDs to themselves? The second question is, what about these workers who might be eligible for a pass, and do they have to state each time they intend on moving in their application? Because, you know, the farmers and so on, they may move twice per day, in the morning and in the afternoon. So what is the requirement for them?
Right. So the Act speaks to farmers and so on being allowed to move with the express approval by the Commissioner of Police. So the expectation is that a farmer would apply for a permit to operate during that period of time, and they will be given the permit to move between the period of the curfew, not the period of the curfew, but the period of the restriction of movement, whether it is during the curfew or during the weekend lockdown period. Once that permit is given to the person, that permit will be valid upon the expiration of the period of the curfew. So everybody has to be given up. You don't only make an application when you, as a farmer, a fisherman, or any of the other names of persons that I mentioned. You make one application, you state what your business is, and you will be given a pass for the period of time that the curfew is in effect. And it's expected that you'd use it every time that you pass through the checkpoints. I hope that answers your question, sir.
Okay, and what about persons, the sole traders and so on, and business owners? Are they required to come to you for a pass, or can they issue IDs to themselves? Because I know earlier on you stated that they can show a company ID.
Right.
But what if I am the only person who works in my business? I am the owner of the business. What do I do with that
Right.
in
And
that scenario?
yeah, so the pass, as we said, the ID card is for the essential workers. So if you are a sole trader and you're not an essential service provider or essential worker, as is described in the regulation, the ID would not suffice. In your case, you'd have to apply for a permit or pass, and the commissioner will consider whether or not your situation, your circumstance requires, with of course consultation with the chief medical officer, whether or not he would issue you a pass to conduct your business. Now remember, not all businesses that are allowed to operate. This is a restricted period of time for a number of things that we are accustomed to be doing to be curtailed significantly, and so not all the businesses are allowed to operate. If you are not listed as essential or in the other categories as mentioned, then you make an application. The commissioner would decide in consultation with the chief medical officer whether a pass is given or not. So the IDs, as I mentioned earlier, was only in the context of the people who are already identified by the regulation as essential worker, and not anybody else. I hope that answers your question.
Mikey, do you have any additional questions?
I'll yield to the others for now.
Sure. Linda, do you have a follow-up question?
I do. In the opening statement of Mr. Francois, he mentioned that the number of police in the force is expected, there are officers affected by COVID. Now, there was a news conference last Monday where it was disclosed that there were 18 officers who were positive. Can you tell us this evening whether or not any of those officers has been declared recovered? And at present, what is the number of officers affected? We have seen massive increases over the past couple of days. So do we have other officers who are affected? And finally, with regard to that, in total, how that affect the officers who are affected? How are they the running of the force? How much it is affected with having less officers to work with now?
Thank you for that question, Linda. And I must indicate that the last figures that were given to you when it refers to 18 officers has significantly changed over the last few days. And I can confirm to you now that as it stands of today, we have 82 positive cases within the Royal Grenada Police Force. 11 of those were overnight within the last 24 hours. So as of yesterday, it was 71, and we had 11 in the last 24 hours. So as it stands now, we are 82. And with respect to your second question, yes, this is significantly affecting the operations of the Royal Grenada Police Force. However, with our commitment to do what is expected of us to ensure the safety and security of Grenada, we are pushing ahead. As of today, we have instructed all our police officers who are on annual leave to report back to the duty station as of 6 p.m. today, in order to augment all of the remaining staff to ensure that we can cover all our operational requirements as we go through this period. So I would say yes, we are affected, and we will continue to be affected as other police officers get infected. And as it stands, we would like to have the fullest cooperation of the general public as we continue to ensure that Grenada remains safe in this period. Thank you.
If I could just follow up with that, Mr. Francois, because of that now, what is the protocol when someone is detained or arrested with COVID? How are persons treated by the police?
We have had several protocols that have been established for persons who are detained or arrested. And as a matter of fact, presently we have active cases of persons who are detained and who are in custody and are positive with COVID-19. But we have been working very closely with the Ministry of Health and the Chief Medical Officer, and we have been testing all persons who have come into custody for COVID-19 with rapid tests and with other tests that the Ministry of Health would require as necessary. And they are isolated from the general area that prisoners are held. So the Her Majesty's Prison is in contact with the RGPF, the medical people are in contact with the RGPF, and we are careful not to contaminate not only other persons in the police station with respect to other prisoners, but also Her Majesty's Prison. So at the moment, we do have a protocol in place, and we are following this protocol to ensure that we can have safety, not only at the prisons, as I said, but also the police station. So I want to assure you that we'll continue to ensure that continues as we want to.
Can you tell us if the officers who are affected, any one of them is classified as severe, anybody hospitalized, or they are all facing mild to moderate symptoms?
They are all mild to moderate symptoms at the moment. We have one person who has been cleared. That was the first person declared COVID-19 in the Western Division. That person has been cleared, and all the others are exhibiting mild to moderate symptoms and are monitored as we speak. The medical persons are monitoring what is happening with all of those officers at this time.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Francois. GBN, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes. Commissioner Francois, you spoke a while ago about protocols for persons who would have been detained and in the prison, as well as protecting the officers. But you also said that you are the RGPF is calling did call all the officers on leave back in. Now, how you guys are going to protect these officers that are coming back? What are some of the measures that are taken as it relates to ensuring that these officers does not get COVID-19, understanding that they may be contact tracing still within the force? I'm talking about the office space here and interacting, understanding that some of the police stations are a bit small as it relates to containing some of the officers. And can somebody clarify, can a farmer who is applying for a pass also apply for his workers? Does the pass also cover their workers?
Okay, Mr. Prince is going to take the one on the farmer, but I'm going to try to answer the first question that you asked, and to assure you that we are doing all that we can do to ensure that our work environment is safe. We have been sanitizing all of our buildings. We have brought in several companies or a particular company that have been assisting us in sanitizing most of our police stations, in addition to the officers themselves who have protocols to follow with respect to sanitization, with respect to the distancing, with respect to wearing of masks, with respect to washing of hands. And we have also been following the distancing, the distances as much as possible to ensure that there are not clusters in any one place at a particular time. So we are following, and we have been in close contact again with the Ministry of Health, who will give advice from time to time. And we have given instructions to all of the police stations what must be followed. The numbers that are coming back, yes, when they return to the station, we do have our tests that are carried out at the stations with respect to the monitoring of persons' temperature, and all the protocols that are established. We are following them at the stations to ensure. And at the same time, I must point out that we are also recommending to officers that they should get vaccinated. This is something that we have been going right around the police force and encouraging officers to do. It's not mandatory, but we have been advising officers in their best interest and their family interest that they should get vaccinated. And in the absence of this, if they are not vaccinated, they should strictly follow the protocols established as a result of for persons who have not vaccinated as well. So whether you're vaccinated or not, There are strict protocols on every police station at this time with respect to COVID-19.
In respect to the question on the farmer, can he apply for his workmen? The question would be, are his workmen farmers as well? And if the answer is yes, then certainly. Farmers here are all persons who are involved in farming. The law speaks to the registration of persons who have already been registered as a farmer. I think the Ministry of Agriculture has a system of registration of farmers. And again, a registered farmer here is considered as an essential worker. So if a farmer who is already registered with the Ministry of Agriculture has his farmer's ID, he doesn't have to apply for a pass because he's already in possession of an ID that identifies him with the farming community. However, if he has workers who does not have an ID, then he or she will apply for the requisite permit for those persons. Yeah. So don't forget the essential people. If they already have the ID, there is no need for them to apply because the law actually provides for their exemption. But the persons who are not, then of course, for us to get to know that you have to have some form of ID. Even if it means a pass that is issued by the RGPF. Thank you.
Just as a follow-up on the question you asked about the protocols as well, I must also add that the Ministry of Health has been collaborating with the RGPF and have been doing several rapid tests at locations throughout the island. So at police headquarters, we have had that on, at Central Division and other areas throughout the force. We have had the Ministry of Health come in to do a rapid test and followed by other tests where necessary.
Thank you so very much, members of the media, for your questions. At this time, we will entertain closing comments from Woman Sergeant Hercules Lambert.
Thank you. As I stated earlier on, that the new regulations, all the offenses are, like to remind the public, are arrestable offenses. However, from the onset of the pandemic, we have worked tirelessly to gain voluntary compliance by members of the public. And we have used the ticketing system because it allows us to address infractions of the law without criminalizing persons. Because what a ticket does is that if you pay it, you do not get a criminal record, right? It exempts you from getting a criminal record. However, if you opt to go to the court system, the sentence will be recorded against your criminal record. So the ticketing system works very well for the force and for the public in terms of you breach the regulations, you have the opportunity to pay without going to court and incurring a criminal record. Also, it exempts you from coming into the station where you may be further exposed to COVID-19. So we, as an organization, we even prefer to ticket persons because the intent is to protect persons, not to criminalize persons, right? So we are asking persons, we are imploring, we do not even want to ticket persons for these offenses. We want voluntary compliance as persons protect, and we asking persons, protect yourselves, protect others, right? So that we can ride this COVID-19 wave that we are experiencing right now, and we can successfully get back to our normal way and our normal way of doing business. So we ask you to work with us, encourage others to comply with the COVID-19 regulations.
Thank you very much, Sergeant Lambert. ACP Prince?
Yes. Again, we want to encourage the community, all the people in Grenada, Carriacou and Petit-Martinique to comply. We are in a state where this is the worst of what we've experienced from since the start of this. This is the worst where we are at now. We believe that it could get better, but we are also aware that it could get worse if persons continue to be careless, if persons continue to not follow laws and procedures and not and to be defiant of authorities, we are going to be in a worse of situation. So we are appealing to the public. We are appealing to everybody who certainly has a stake in this to do your part. Law enforcement will do their part, and we will not stop at anything that would allow us to achieve our objective in a way to bring this pandemic under control and to allow Grenada to some extent to return to some state of normalcy. So every individual has a part to play. We are asking you. We've been doing that from the beginning. Since this thing started, we've been asking people to play the part. We are now at a critical point where your patriotism, your love for country should be more manifested in this time. So again, we're looking forward to the cooperation of all to bring us back to that state of normalcy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Commissioner Francois.
Thank you, and I too want to really call on the Grenadian population to comply with the regulations, the COVID-19 regulations. We have been having a good cooperation from members of the public so far, but I must indicate that in order to ensure that we are successful, your fullest cooperation is anticipated in this regard. The Royal Grenada Police Force is stretched at this time with respect to all that we are expected to provide for enforcement of these regulations. We are still expected to carry out our normal law enforcement functions of fire, Coast Guard, immigration, and all the other functions that you are expected to perform. And at the same time, many of our officers, because they belong to the community, just as all of our citizens, they would come down with certain diseases like COVID-19 as well. So with your support, let us hope that we can do this together and to call in your support to ensure that these regulations are adhered to. Finally, I want to remind persons of Section 9 of the regulations, which speak to what businesses are entitled to open. It speaks to businesses and establishments and offices and so on, and there are 28 of those listed. If your business is not listed among the 28, please apply to the Commissioner before your business is opened. We must appreciate that these regulations came into force on the 4th, which was after midnight last night. And today there were some businesses that were opened which were not supposed to open. But of course, we understand what may have happened there, and it's not our responsibility to give permission for persons to do that. But we will be strictly enforcing Section 9 to ensure that if you are not part of these 28 established businesses, offices, or establishments, that you must have permission from the Commissioner of Police to operate. I just wanted to clarify that and to wish everyone every success and continue to pray for the Royal Grenada Police Force, all its men and women, as we pray for the state of Grenada to ensure that we remain safe, secure, and sound, and that safety and security prevail. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Commissioner Francois. And here are a few takeaways from this evening's press conference. 10th to 13th September, 17th to 20th September, between the hours of 5 p.m. and 5 a.m. are no movement weekends. A weekday curfew are effective from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. Businesses that are allowed to operate shall do so between the hours of 6 a.m. or May 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. Persons who need to travel between Grenada and Carriacou, you need to apply to the Ports Authority for authorization for movement, and you're firstly subjected to a negative rapid antigen test. However, individuals who are desirous of obtaining passes for other purposes, they need to apply to the Commissioner of Police, who will consult with the CMO for permission to do so. And you can email your request to rgpfcovidops@gmail.com. I repeat, rgpfcovid ops@gmail.com, or you can contact us on 405-7743, 405-7743, or you can drop in your request to the nearest police station for those of you who do not have access to emails. And finally, please be reminded that an amendment was made to the regulations and all construction works are permitted. So there's no need to apply to the PS works for permission to do so. All construction works are permitted. Thank you so very much, everyone, for joining us this evening. We appreciate your presence and thank you and look forward to seeing you again. Thanks.